Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Mem Vav. One last sugya about a minor girl accepting Kiddushin without her father's consent. And then we'll get to the next Mishnah. Itmar. Ketana shenit kadesha shelo leda'at aviha. A minor girl who receives Kiddushin without the consent of her father. Amar Rab ben hi ben aviha yecholin le'akeb. V'Rab aseh amar aviha velo hi. Rav says both her father and she herself can refuse that marriage. Of course, her father can, and this is according to Rav, remember, who said the father comes later and says, well, maybe he could say, I agreed to it. I would have agreed to it, right? It is okay, and then it would be a good marriage. If not, he says, wait, you did this on your own? I never agreed to it. I would not have agreed to it. Then there is no Kiddushin at all. That's obvious, and Rav Aseh agrees. Of course, the father can refuse, and then there'll be no Kiddushin at all. And Rav's Chiddush here is that she herself, even though she consented originally and received the Kiddushin, but it doesn't go into effect because we have to see what the father thinks. If in the meantime she changes her mind and says, you know what, I did not want that Kiddushin, then also it's null and void. If the father agrees to it from the beginning, then that's it. The father has total rights over his minor daughter. He can even overpower and marry her off against her will. But the point here is that even though she accepted the Kiddushin, but the father has not yet weighed in, she can say, I refuse, or the father can say, I refuse. That's Rav's opinion. Rav Aseh says, no. Since she already agreed to it when she accepted the Kiddushin, that's it. She locked in her vote. The father can always come and say, I object to it, and there'll be no Kiddushin. But once the father agrees, then that Kiddushin will be good. There's nothing that she can do about it anymore. All right, that's the two opinions. Now we ask, Itibe Rav Huna the Rav Aseh. Rav Aseh is a contemporary of Rav, first generation Amorah in Bavel. And so Rav Huna, Rav's student, challenges Rav Aseh. Amrila Chaya bar Rav le Rav Aseh. Some say it's Chaya, the son of Rav, asked Rav Aseh, Im ma'en yema'en aviha. En li ela aviha. Hi atzma minayin. Talmud omar im ma'en yema'en mikol makom. The question is based on these pisukim here about the seducer. If a man comes and seduces a minor girl who was not married before, and she convinces her to sleep with him, so now, right, the father at this point was not involved. He went and seduced her directly. So there's two choices in the consequence. One choice is Mahodim Harena, he has to pay the bride price and she will become his wife. That's if the father agrees, right? They come, they're found, and they come and say, what'd you do? You did this to my daughter, you seduced her. Well, I like you anyway, and maybe they were going out or not, whatever. And he says, okay, well now that you did this, you know what? Pay the bride price and now be married. That's one option. However, even if the father refuses and says, what kind of guy are you? I don't want you for my daughter. I refuse this, so you're not going to be married to her. He, the seducer, nevertheless has to pay the amount of the mar betulot, because now she's not a betula anymore, and then when she eventually gets married, she won't be able to receive that amount from her future groom, the amount for a betula. And so this guy, the seducer, has to pay that amount, whether they end up getting married with the father's agreement, or if the father refuses, he still has to pay the amount, that same amount, and he does not get to marry her. Okay, that's the basic law. Now, the derasha comes from the double language, ma'en, yema'en. Why does it say this twice? So it's the answer is if I had just once, I know that the father can object and say, I don't want this marriage, right? You pay and leave. But what about she herself? What if she says, she objects, and even though she was seduced, okay, she's a minor, right? Then she could say, no, I don't want to marry him. Does she have a right to object, even if the father would agree? And the answer is yes, because it says ma'en, yema'en, double language. All right, based on this braita, we have a challenge to Rav Aseh, because Rav Aseh, similar situation, where she goes and accepts Kiddushin from some guy, And then she says, no, I don't, I refuse it. Rav Aseh said, no, she cannot refuse it anymore. She already accepted Kiddushin, so now if the father agrees, that's it. They have to get married. Well, that's similar to this case where a man seduced her, so she agreed to it, and then then she decides she wants to refuse. She has a right to refuse even after she agreed. So this baraita supports Rav and is a challenge to Rav Aseh. Okay, good question. Amalehu Rav la tizlu bataripecha. Rav, however, very nicely supports and responds for his colleague Rav Aseh. Right, we saw in the previous stuff how Rav, even though he has his own opinion, nevertheless was humble enough to be machmir according to another opinion that challenged him. So Rav here says, this is not a challenge to my opponent, Rav Aseh, right? Don't go to the opposite direction on my behalf, because this is baraita is not a proof. We can explain that this baraita is talking about a case where this man seduced her not for the sake of marriage. He didn't have in mind that, well, let's, come and sleep with me and that will be for Kiddushin. He didn't have in mind that this would lead towards marriage. He did it just for zenut. And for that reason, she can come and say, I don't want him, and say, I'm not into this continuing into marriage. That's why she can object. That's different from the case that we're talking about, where she accepted Kiddushin, right? She accepted money, knowing that this is for Kiddushin. Once she accepts that, then she cannot refuse. And so that's a ready answer on behalf of Rav Aseh. Now we ask, Pita shelo l'shum ishut kera ba'eh? Wait a second. If we're talking about a case here in this b'raita where he seduced her not for the sake of marriage, not for the sake of Kiddushin, do I need a pasuk that says that both the father and the daughter can refuse? He seduced her not for marriage, so of course the daughter can refuse. Why do I need a pasuk? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, lo ma shemishalem kenas kemefuta. And the answer is, yes, the obvious thing is that she doesn't have to go through with marriage. She never agreed to that in the first place. That's the obvious part. The chidush here of the double language is that this guy would have to pay that fine, even though the father would agree to the marriage, but she's the one that refuses. Even though the father would have agreed and she's the one that refused, nevertheless, he has to pay that fine for removing her betulim. That's the chidush. Okay, so that's a good answer. Amar le Rav Yosef. And so in the end, we don't have a challenge against Rav Aseh. Now we're going to try to bring a proof that this is in fact a good reading of this baraita. Amar Rav Yosef, ihachi hainu detanena. Here we have yet another baraita that would teach the same thing. Mahor imharena lo leisha shesericham hemenu kiddushin. When this pasuk says that he has to pay a bride price and then they will be married, we learn from this that they actually need kiddushin, even though he seduced her and they slept together. And now if they agree and they want to go through and turn this into a marriage, he still has to give her kiddushin. That act that they did is not considered kiddushin. Now what's the case? If that seduction was for the sake of marriage, why did he need kiddushin? He slept with her. If it was for Kiddushin and she accepted it, and then the father comes along and says, okay, I like this guy anyway, and so why do I need another act of Kiddushin? Rather, it must be that we're talking about a case that it was not Leshem Kiddushin, and therefore this baraita would support the interpretation that Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak gave above, that these Pesukim are talking about when it was not done Leshem Kiddushin. Isn't that a good proof? Amar le Abaye, Siricha Kiddushin la'adat aviha. And Abaye says not necessarily. It could be that this guy seduced her Leshem Kiddushin, and nevertheless, if they decide that they're going to go ahead and get married, he still has to give another Kiddushin because now it needs the father's consent. The first time around, he did it, he seduced her without the father's consent. So even though that was L'Shem Kiddushin, nevertheless, that doesn't effectuate Kiddushin. The father did not agree to it. So that's what the Baraita is teaching, that he has to do another act of Kiddushin in order to effectuate the marriage. That brings us to the next Mishnah. Ha'omer le'isha hitkachi li bitmara zo hitkachi li bezo. Im yesh b'achat mehen shaveh piruta mikudeshet v'im lav ena mikudeshet. A man tells a woman, be mikudeshet to me with this date. Not the date that they're going out to a restaurant on, but with the fruit. Here's one date, and mikudeshet to me. And then he says a separate statement, and be mikudeshet to me with this date. And he hands her a second date. Because he said two separate formulas, in order for any one of them to be effectuated, at least one of the dates has to be worth a shaveh peruta. But if both dates are worth less than a shaveh peruta, she's not mikudeshet. You don't add them together because he said two separate hitkachi formulas. However, that's the resha. Next case is bezo ubezo im yesh shaveh perutan bechulan mikudeshet v'im lav ena mikudeshet. If he says only one formula, be mikudeshet to me with this date and this date and this date, and he hands her not all at the same time, but he hands her one and then another and then another. Well, then since he said one formula, even though it doesn't matter how many acts of actually giving, it's just like one long giving. He's just giving it to her over time. By the time he gets the next one, he has to give it to her. But because it's all one formula, then you put them all together, and as long as there is a shaveh peruta for all the dates put together, then that works. Otherwise, not. הייתה אוכלת ראשונה אינה מקודשת עד שיהיה באחת מהן שווה פירותה. However, if she was eating them as she got them, the Gemara will discuss, is this going on the resha or is this modifying the sefa? And we'll see that in a second. And now, if he gives her a date and she eats it, he gives her another day and she eats it. He said haret mikudeshet some right in the beginning, but she's eating them before he gets a chance to finish the giving. Then she is not mikudeshet unless there is in one of them a shaveh peruta. You can't add them all together because she is eating them, and so that by the time he gives her the second and third one, she already ate the first one, and it's already not there. And so one of them has to be by itself worth a shaveh peruta. Okay, good. Mantana hitkachi. Amar Rabba Rabbi Shimon hidamad ad shiomad shivoah lechol echad ve'echad. Who is the author of this Mishnah that makes a distinction between two formulas and one formula? Rabbah says it is Rabbi Shimon who said in the context of a shivu'ah, he makes a similar distinction. We saw this already. Let's review. Rabbi Shimon says, in a case where, let's say I'm holding on to deposits for a number of people, and they come to claim the deposits, and I say, oh, I don't have them. And so they say, well, you have to swear. Okay, I have to swear. If I make, let's say I swear falsely, I really have them. And I say one swear formula, right? I swear that I don't have the deposits of any of you and you and you. Then I only lied once. I only have to bring one korban chatat. However, if I said separate formulas, I promise I don't have the item for you. And then he separately, I promise I don't have your item. If he says 5 separate formulas, then he has to bring korban for each and every one. So the formula is what binds them together. And here too, if he says separate formulas, then any one of the dates needs to be a shaveh peruta. But if he says one formula and gives multiple dates, then you can combine all the dates together. So that is consistent with Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Now, the last case, bezo, miesh b'kolan shaveh peruta, and if she's eating them along the way, then it has to be shaveh peruta for one of them. Ahaya, is this last clause going on the resha? Ilema aresha, may iria ochelet, afilu manachat name, dahait kachili bezo ka'amar. If it's going on the first case, so then what does it matter if she's eating it? Even if she places it down on the table, the point there is that since he said separate formulas, and there is not shaveh peruta in any one of them, so she's not mikudeshet. And even if she just puts it on the table and leaves it there, she's not going to be mikudeshet because you can't add them all together because he said separate formulas. So how does it help that eating them is it makes it even worse? So certainly that wouldn't be good, right? What are you adding to the first case if she's already if none of them are shaveh peruta? Even if she leaves it on the table, she's not mikudeshet. Surely if she eats them, she's not mikudeshet. So it can't be that it's modifying the resha. ela asefa. Vafilu bakamaita. So okay, it's modifying the sefa, but now we ask, well, as long as one of them is shaveh piruta, because she's eating them, and so they're not there anymore, so it's no good. Now, but if one of them is shaveh piruta, it's okay. Now we ask, well, which one of them? Let's say it's the first one. The first one is a shaveh piruta, but she eats it. So this is a problem because veha milvehi is just a loan. See, it works as follows. When the guy is giving the dates, the Kiddushin is not completed until he finishes his act of giving, right? He's finding them, he's taking them out of the bag. Oh, here's one. Hold on, I'm not done yet. Here's another one. And until he finishes, the first ones that he gives are considered a loan, because if she says no, then she's going to have to give them back to him. Right? Because he says, I gave you all these dates, mikudeshet, right? Hadeh mikudesh with these dates, and she says, no, I refuse. Then she's going to have to give it back to him, and he's not done until he finishes giving the last one. So in the meantime, if it takes some time to finally give each of them, well, then during that time, that date is considered a loan. And we have a law that you cannot be mikudeshet with a loan. I can't go to him and say, here is a loan of $100 that you have to pay back to me next week. So be mikudeshet to me with this loan, with this $100 I'm giving you as a loan. That doesn't work. And so even if the first date is worth a peruta, the Kiddushin will not be effective. And so now this clause can't be on the Resha. It can't be on the Sefa. So Rabbi Yochanan makes an analogy to a set table. Here's a table, there's a meat, there's a knife, and yet we have nothing to eat. In other words, the Mishnah says everything. Doesn't look like it's a complicated Mishnah. It seems to say exactly what it means, but then when you look into it, it can't be on the Resha, it can't be on the Sefa, and so we can't eat the meal, we can't enjoy the lesson of what this Mishnah means. But don't worry, we're going to have two answers. Rav Shmuel Amre Tarvaihu Lolam Aresha Velami Baya Kamar Lami Baya Manachat Ika Sheve Piruta In Ilala. In fact, it is going on the Resha, and it's saying it's not necessary to say this, but even the next case, which is actually a bigger chidush, and we'll say why it's a bigger chidush. Not only when she puts it down, and she puts each of them down, where if there's a piruta in one of them, then that's fine, because he says separate formulas, that's okay. But if not if each of the dates none of the dates have a piruta by themselves, it's no good. You don't add them together because they're separate formulas. That's true not only in that case, but I might have thought, but if she eats it, then since her benefit is immediate, so that is worth more to her. By in that act, even if they're all worth less than a shaveh piruta, and they're separate formulas, but the fact that she took one of them and ate it, that shows her consent, right? What more consent is there than that? And even though it's worth less than a piruta, maybe she agrees to transfer herself for less than a peruta, because that bite of immediate gratification is so good that she's willing to give herself over in marriage. I might have thought that would be true, and kamash malan. So actually the eating is actually a bigger chidush than leaving it there on the side. And so that's option number one. Rabbi Ameh amar leolam asefa umay al sheyeh ba'achat mehen shaveh peruta al sheyeh ba'acharona shaveh peruta. Rabbi Ameh says, no, I could explain it. It's talking about the sefa, where he in fact said one formula. And you're right. If she ate the first one, and even if it was a shaveh peruta, it would not be a good kiddushin, because that is still considered a loan. So rather, what are we talking about? That if one of them is a shaveh peruta, we're talking about the last one, because once he gives the last one, his giving is done, his act is done, and now it's up to her. And so if she goes and takes the last one and eats it, then that last one, if it's a shaveh peruta, so the previous ones are all a loan. It's a loan building up because they're sitting there, and if she takes them, she'll have to put them back. And the fact that she did take them, let's say she ate all of them, right? But those are still loans. So, and the act of giving is not completed. But when he gives the last one, so by taking that one and eating it, if not eating it, doesn't matter, even if she eats it, that shows that she is mikudeshet with the last one, and the ones that were all alone, okay, so then that doesn't matter, as long as the last one was a shaveh peruta, and that's the case is talking about. Amar Rava, Shema minam Rabbi Ameh telat. Rava says we can learn 3 halachot from this interpretation that Rabbi Ameh gave. Shema minam mikadesh b'milveh na mikudeshet. Number 1, if you try to do kiddushin with a loan, right? Here's be mikodesh with this $100 that you have to pay me back next week. It's no good. You have to give her something. Ushma minah mikadesh b'milveh upruta data pruta. And second, if I say you're mikodesh to me with this $1,000 loan and also with this 1 quarter here. So even if you say that, it works, because her mind is on that last coin that you gave her. Even though the $1,000, she's not relying on the $1,000. She can't rely on it because you can't use a loan to mikodesh it. And so that we ignore, and we assume that she is fine with being mikudeshet with the coin, which is the only thing that's significant and that's relevant here, because even if he gave her lots of dates and whatever else as a loan, but the last date is a shaveh peruta, then she has in mind to be mikudeshet just with that, and that works. Ushma mina ma'ot be'alma chozrim. And we learn in general that money that's given to Kiddushin, if she doesn't accept it, has to be returned. You don't say that, oh, here, be mikodesh to me with this coin here. And then she takes it and she says, no, I don't agree. Well, then she can't keep it. It's not considered a gift. No, she has to pay it back. And that's why all the first dates that he gave her are considered a loan until he finishes giving it. And she then agrees, only then is the Kiddushin. If she doesn't agree, she would have to pay everything back. We just saw the principle that if a man gives some money to a woman, and they said mikaret mikudeshedli, and she refuses, then she has to pay back the money. She has to give it back. She can't just keep it. It's not a gift. He was giving it only for Kiddushin. And therefore, if she refuses, she owes the money back. Now we're going to see an interesting application of this law. Itmar. Hamikadesh ahoto. Rav amar ma'ot chozrim, ushmuel amar ma'ot matana. If a brother gives money to his sister and says, harat mikudeshet li. Now, obviously, this is arayot, so therefore, there is no kiddushin at all. But he did give her this money. So what's the status of the money? Does she have to return it or not? Rav says, yes, she has to return the money. And Shmuel says, it's a gift and she can keep the money. Thank you very much. Rav amar ma'ot chozrim. What's the reason? Adam yodea she'en kiddushin tofsin ba'achoto ve'gamar v'natan lashum pikadon. Since everybody knows that there's no such thing as kiddushin with one sister, it's not going to take effect, but he's giving her the money, so that means he knows it's not going to be for kiddushin, and he's giving it to her as a deposit to hold for him. Right? He really wants her to hold it because he's going on a trip and he doesn't want to carry it with him, so that's why he gave it to her. Now, v'lema lad mishum pikadon. Well, that's kind of a strange roundabout way. Why not just say, I'm giving this to you as a deposit, hold on to it for me, I'm going to come back in a week and pick it up. And the answer is savar la mikabela, because he thought that she's not going to accept it. She doesn't want to take care of the money, and she's going to say no. Therefore, he used a trick and said, Hadat mikudeshet li. I guess she was probably a little confused. Why is my brother proposing to me? But she's holding on to the money. He leaves, and then he comes back and said, oh, where's the money? She says, well, it's here. Why'd you give it to me? I thought I'm mikudeshet. No, there's no kiddushin. Everybody knows there's no kiddushin. I want to give it to you as a deposit. So that's the assumption, and therefore she does have to give it back to him. Okay, that's the opinion of Rav. Ushmuel sabar ma'ot matana. Adam yodea she'en kiddushin tofsin ba'achoto ve'gamar v'natan l'shum matana v'ne'ema la mishum l'shum matana sabar kesifa la milta. In fact, it's a gift. Once the brother says, Adam mikudeshet li, with this money, he gives her the money. Doesn't matter what she says, because there's no kiddushin, and everybody knows there's no kiddushin. So since everybody knows there's no kiddushin, and he gives it to her anyway, it means he wants to give her a gift. Now, why not say, here, I'm giving you a gift, happy birthday, right, this is for you, because he thought that it would be embarrassing, she wouldn't want to accept a gift, or maybe she's, not some down and out, she needs cash, but she would be embarrassed to take, so he says, listen, this is money for kiddushin. He makes up basically an excuse to give her money. Everybody knows there's no kiddushin, and therefore, in this case, she can keep it as a gift. All right, that's Shmuel's opinion, and we're going to question Shmuel for the rest of the daf. Mativ Ravina, המפריש חלתו קמח אינו חלה וגזל ביד כהן. והמאי גזל ביד כהן? נאמר אדם יודע שאין מפרישין חלה קמח ונתן לשם מתנה. So here, Ravina challenges from a Mishnah in Chala that says, let's say I'm making, I have some flour. Usually, I have to take the flour, knead it with water, make dough, and if I have sufficient amount of dough, 5/4 of a kav is the minimum amount, then I have to take part of the dough and I separate that as designated as challah, and that becomes challah, and I have to give that to the kohen. But this guy, even he just takes the flour before it's kneaded into dough, and he separates from flour. The law is that's not challah. You don't have to give the dough is not liable to challah until it's made into dough, not while it's flour. But this guy, instead, he jumped the gun. He separated a cup of flour instead from the dough, and he gave it to a kohen. So first of all, it's not challah, which means that the rest of the dough, you're not allowed to eat it because challah was not taken from it. And if he gives it to the kohen, it's considered stolen goods in the hands of the kohen. The kohen has to give it back. So now we ask, why does he have to give it back? Right? Why do you call the stolen goods in the hand of the kohen? Why don't we say everybody knows that you don't give flour as challah, and so if the baker gave it to the kohen anyway, it means he's giving him a gift, right? That would be the same applications to parallel case. Everybody knows there's no Kiddushin with the sister, and there you say it's a gift, and the sister can keep it. Why don't you say the same thing here, that the kohen can keep it as a gift? But you don't say that. Since it's not really challah, the kohen has to give it back. So same thing should be in the case of Kiddushin. Since it's not really Kiddushin, the sister should have to give it back. That's the question against Shemuel. We answer, no, in the case of challah, it's different because there could be a bad situation, problematic situation can come from it. Zimnin di'itle לכהן פחות מחמש רבעים קמח בהי, אליש לבהדה הדדה. כסבה נתקנה עיסתו, והתה למכלה בתבלה. Because you could have a case where the Kohen has less than 5/4 of a kav, less than a kav, a full kav and a quarter. So he has less than the minimum amount. But he also has this little cup of flour that the baker gave him. And so he thinks that, well, the actual flour I had before is less than the minimum amount. So I don't have to bring challah on the under 5/4. And this that he gave me is already challah. You don't have to take challah on something that's already challah. So since what he gave me is already challah, he'll mix them together, and even though it's more than 5/4, he'll think to himself and he'll reason that, well, part of it is already challah, so that's exempt from challah, and therefore I'm under the minimum threshold, and he will then eat this whole dough without having taken challah. So therefore, since it can lead to a problem where he said, tell the kohen, you better give it back, right? Because if you keep it around thinking that it's challah, then you're going to come to an error. Whereas in the case of the woman who the brother gave her money, and she keeps the money because we assume that he knows that he can't do Kiddushin with his sister, so he gave it as a gift. So she keeps it as a gift. No problem can come from that. So that's the reason here why we have to make him give it back. Hold on. Wait a second. You just said that everybody knows that you cannot give flour as challah. So the kohen, he should know, right, better than anybody, that this flour that he got is not actually challah. So it's just a gift, but he should know it's not actually challah, and he shouldn't assume that he can mix it in with the rest of the dough and that it won't count. And the answer is yodea ve'eno yodea. Sometimes people know something, but they don't know it precisely. He knows the law that you're not supposed to separate flour and designate that as challah. But he doesn't know the full reason. But he doesn't know the reason why. He thinks it's because we shouldn't give extra work to the kohen. That we give him just flour, and now he has to go and knead it and bake it himself. You should be, when you're giving a gift, you should give something that's ready for the kohen, right? Give him a ready piece of bread that he can go ahead and eat. At least give him dough that he can go and have, and not just flour. So we would think that the reason is only to save trouble from extra work to the Kohen. But this Kohen, he says, I don't mind taking the dough because I'm making dough here anyway. I'll mix it in. So he thinks that it is valid terumah if it's given, and if the Kohen doesn't mind, because it's just for extra work. So even though everybody knows the law, they don't know precisely, and they'll think that if it's given and the Kohen accepts, then it is in fact challah, and that's why in fact, yes, it can lead to a serious problem. Now we have a different solution. Another way to get out of the possible problem of the less than 5/4, and then you're going to add this. Instead of having the Kohen give it back and say you're a thief for keeping it, why not just make a declaration that if a Kohen receives flour as halal, let him keep it as a gift. It says tirumah. It doesn't mean it's actually like actual tirumah of produce. It just means it is a gift. He keeps it, but he can't eat it until he takes halal from it from another place. In other words, remember, yes, it's yours, but you still have to take halal from it. You're going to mix it into dough, and it's going to be big dough. You have to take halal from that bit, from all that flour as well. And we have a precedent for requiring such a chumrah. Milo tenan, mina nakuv al sheno nakuv tirumah, velo techel ad sheyosi aleh tirumah ma'ased mimakom acher. The law regarding pots, if something grows in a pot, do you have to give terumah? Well, the answer is if it has a hole in it so that it gets sustenance from the ground, then yes, on the doraita level, you have to give terumah, give terumah from whatever grows in that pot. But if it's a pot that doesn't have a hole in it, then it requires the terumah only midrabanan. And here's the thing, you can't separate, you have to separate from the Rabbanan for the Rabbanan, because that's one stage. You can't separate from the Rabbanan to the Deoraita, or from the produce that grows in the Deoraita pot for the Rabbanan, right? Because they won't cross over, it won't work. So this guy, this farmer, what did he do? He took some of the nakuv, some of the perforated pot, that is actually deoraita, that you have to take terumah from it deoraita, and he used that and gave it as terumah for the what grew in the pot that had no hole, that was only required midrabanan, and therefore that fruit that he gave to the Kohen, he gave it as terumah, but actually it's not terumah, because if you separate from something that doesn't require you to bring terumah, then it doesn't have the status of terumah. So actually, it's even worse because it's tebel. So he separated he gave some fruit from the one that is perforated, gave it to the Kohen. The Kohen thinks it's terumah, even though it's actually not terumah at all. It's actually tevel, and requires that someone separate from that. When someone does that, we go and tell the Kohen, listen, it's yours, you can keep it, but don't eat it until you take terumah and ma'ased on that fruit that he gave you from some other place. Doesn't have to be from some other place. It could be from that very a few things. I gave him 10 olives, and from a perforated, I don't know if you can grow olives in a pot, but whatever, right? I gave him 10 fruits from this for something that's in a perforated pot, so he'll going to give it to the Kohen. He has to make sure to take terumah from those 10, take a little bit for terumah, take one out of 10 as ma'ased, and so that way he can keep it, but he has to fix it. Now, why don't we say the same thing here, that, listen, you got flour, you can keep it, but just make sure to take terumah from it. Wouldn't that be a better solution? And the answer is, bitre maneh sa'it, behad mana la sa'it. No, it's different. When you're talking about two containers, like the perforated, unperforated, there, if you tell the Kohen, listen, he gave you from the perforated for the unperforated, and therefore it's no good. Everybody Kohen will understand that, and he'll listen and say, oh, I see, this is a problem. Okay, I'll make sure to fix it, and I'll take terumah, and he'll listen. But if when he gets just one container of flour, he's going to say, well, I got this. I only see one container here. He gave it to me as halal, and I don't mind doing the extra work. So he'll think it's okay, and he's not going to listen to the rabbis that say, listen, it's really not challah, and he doesn't say challah, don't mix it in with something else. It's because the problem isn't as clear. The problem is much clearer when there's two separate containers, and it's not as clear when there's only one container. And that's why we say, you know what, give it back. All that is one answer. But we have yet another answer to explain. Shemuel and reconcile him with that Mishnah. Really, maybe a Kohen would understand. The Kohanim, they know about the laws of challah, and if you tell them, listen, this is flour, it's not really challah. Okay, so it's a gift, but it's not going to work. So, but it's a gift, but you have to make sure to take challah. The Kohen will listen. The problem is not on the Kohen side, but rather on the baker side. The problem is him. The baker will say, listen, I had all this flour here. I took some flour, I separated challah, I gave it to the Kohen, and he'll think that's okay. And he's not going to take challah after he needed it, and he'll end up eating the dough without taking challah from it. So we have to make sure that the Kohen gives it back. This is why are you giving this back? It's not challah. Oh, it's not challah. Oh, that means I didn't take challah yet. So to ensure that the baker will do the right thing, we make the Kohen give it back. Wait a second. Doesn't the baker know? We said everybody knows that you can't give flour as challah, so the baker should know that. And the answer here too is yodea ve'eno yodea. He does know generally, but not precisely. Yodea she'en mafrishin challah kemach ve'eno yodea de sabar tamamai mishum tircha de kohen. Kibela ale. He knows that in general there's a rule you're not supposed to give flour as challah, but he doesn't know the reason. He thinks what's the reason why? Because of the extra effort of the Kohen that he's going to have to go and make dough out of it. But he knows that this Kohen he's not going to mind. This Kohen, he likes making dough and he always does it. And so he'll think that it's kosher, even though you're not supposed to. This Kohen won't mind, and he'll think that it's permitted. And therefore, we have to make sure that he doesn't do that. So the Kohen has to give it back. So he'll say, oh, it's not flour. I better take challah from the dough. Teheve tiruma v'yachzor v'yitrom mila tenan mishe'eno nakuv al nakuv tiruma v'yachzor v'yitrom. So now we said, and so wait, why does the Kohen have to give it back in order for the baker to know that it's not challah? Why not tell him, listen, what you gave, the flour that you gave is a gift, that's terumah, and the Kohen can keep it, but we're going to decree upon you, since you gave it as flour, you have to go and take another piece of challah. Don't we have the same, very same solution in that same Mishnah in Demai, but now it's the other way around, that if you separate terumah from the plant that's not perforated, right? So you take here's the plant that's not perforated. Here's some things, fruits that grow. I take a few fruits and I separate it out as terumah on behalf of the other pot that is perforated. Now the one that is perforated requires me to take deoraita. Something that's chayav and deoraita, I have to take some of that. If they were both the same level, both deoraita requirement, I could take from here for the other one. But that one it requires separating deoraita. I took from this non-perforated pot, which actually doesn't require terumah deoraita. I gave it to the Kohen, so that act doesn't do anything. It doesn't actually help me with the fruit from the perforated pot. And so now the one from the perforated pot is still going to require terumah. So here's a simple solution. He keeps what I gave it to him, but that's terumah. And now we tell the guy, listen, you have to take terumah again from the perforated pot. So why not say a same solution here? The flour you gave is already given, and now take terumah again from the dough. The answer is how kimna bitremane sa'id bechad mana la sa'id. It's because the person will listen to the logic if it's two separate containers. We come and tell him, oh, you gave from the wrong pot, one pot to another pot. And they're different kinds of pots, so it didn't work. You have to go and give again. People will understand that logic. But if it's just one container, I gave him flour, right? I gave him one thing, and so what do you mean I mixed up? I mixed up what? The flour with dough? What's the difference? He doesn't care. He accepted it. So people won't understand what the problem is, and therefore we can't use this workaround to go fix it. They won't listen. And we ask, Vela Sa'id Hatanan. We have another Mishnah in Terumot that says, now we're talking about just one pot, right? Just one field, one item. Someone takes terumah from cucumbers, right? He takes a bunch of cucumbers, he takes one, and gives it to the Kohen, but it turns out that that cucumber that he gave to the Kohen was bitter. Or some melons, and he separates one melon, and he gives it to the Kohen, and it turns out that that one is spoiled, the one that he gave. Now, this is not good. It's not good terumah if you give something spoiled. So we tell him you have to give terumah again. So what do you see here? That a person will listen. If he does something wrong, even if it's not two different pots, even if he just from the one pile, he gives something and it turns out to be spoiled, we tell him to do it again. We assume that the person will listen. So how come over here you think he will listen? And the answer is, no, in this case it's different because the bad cucumber, a bad melon that he gave on a doraita level is actually terumah. So on the doraita level, he fulfilled his obligation. We're not worried about the rest of it is not going to be tebel medoraita. We just make him go and do it again because he did something that's not so nice. It's not right. Not respectful to the Kohen, to terumah, to the law, to give something that's spoiled. So we say go and do it again. But really that requirement is only midrabanan. And that's why we're not so worried. If he doesn't listen, okay, he's not going to violate the deoraita of terumah. How do we know? This meant to be elai. How do you know to be elai teaches that if you take some bad fruit for good fruit, even though you're not supposed to, the terumah is effective and the rest is not tebel, it's kosher. The pasuk says, don't put a sin upon yourself. Instead, give the best. Now, if it doesn't work, if it's not effective, that what I take, the bad stuff that I take, is not holy, is not terumah, then what sin did I make? If I take a bad cucumber and give it to the Kohen, and you're telling me it's not terumah at all, so then I did no sin, right? I just gave him I just did nonsense. I gave him a bad cucumber. If I go to a random person, I give him a present of a bad cucumber. It's not a sin because it's not terumah. So if you say that it's not an effective act of terumah, then why would I sin? Rather, it must be that it is terumah. And that's why he says, don't make a serious sin by giving the bad stuff, give the good stuff. It means if I give the bad stuff, is a sin because it is effectively terumah, but it's not nice terumah. So so we learn from here that someone who gives a bad melon for good melons, it is in fact terumah, but he should go ahead and give a good melon after that so that he doesn't have the sin of disrespecting the law of terumah. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.